There's no peace possible with a regime based on what the UN last week, the UN report, said. It didn't use the word genocide, it said extermination of Palestinians. No peace is possible, and until that dark shadow is lifted from the Middle East, the people across the whole Middle East, not just in Palestine, will always face the horror of this regime. And we have seen it is more bestial, more barbaric than anything that we could imagine. I think, Osama, if somebody had written a novel about this 2 years ago and sent this story to their editor, the editor would return the manuscript and say, this is too much. Nobody will believe this.
The Israeli genocidal crimes against the Palestinian people, mainly in North Gaza, are at the final stage as Israel leaves nothing intact. It kills the people, destroys the hospitals and sheltering the schools, leaving no chance for the people to survive. And against this genocidal backdrop, solidarity with the Palestinian people is increasing as the people, mainly in the West, are discovering the true face of the Israeli occupation, and so they say no to the governments and officials who work hard in favor of the Zionist project. And to highlight that, I have with me Mick Napier of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. A great honor to have you on our program, Mr. Napier.
I'm very honored that you will have me speaking to you from the axis of genocide, from the coalition of genocide, Britain.
Yes, and that's why you appeared before the court maybe 2 days ago, and you said, if we fight, we can win, and if we don't fight, we go down. To whom this statement is addressed, and if you put us in the context in which it issued.
Thank you, Osama.
Yes.
Look, during this year of genocide, many, many millions of people have learned something they did not know before, or they had an idea, but it wasn't clear. You know, it's like one of those horror films. I don't watch horror films, but sometimes you get a sheet of lightning, and then everybody can see on the screen what they couldn't see before. And I think this is what's happening around the world. People can see the full barbarity, the savagery of the Israeli regime, and what our governments, I have 2 passports, Canadian and British, what our governments are supporting completely. So there has been a fantastic learning curve, and people are angry, and many, many more people. We had 1 million people marching through London in support of Palestine, never seen before. So there's something very new happening, but we also have repression. It's not like they're taking people out and killing them, but, you know, children in school, for example, it starts in the school and it goes up to the mainstream media. Children in our schools a few months ago were really forced to draw Ukrainian flags and to express their feelings for Ukrainian children. But inside every school in Britain today, if children go to their teacher or their head teacher to say, there are very few exceptions, but what I say is 99.9% true.
Yes.
If they try to say, I want to do something with Palestinian children, I have poems here from Palestinian children who are now dead, I want to talk about this in my school, they get into trouble. They are met with a wall of silence. They're told that if they continue, they'll be reported to the authorities. And that's the school, Osama. Yeah. But it's also everywhere. You probably know with a sinking heart that last week or the week before, FIFA, the Football Association, refused to condemn Israel for its crimes against Palestinian footballers and just allowed it to go on and on and on. So it's not just in the political sphere, it's the way the society is organized. And you know, I've been banned a few times from the city centre of Scotland's biggest city,
yeah.
You know, to prevent us from organising. It's low-level harassment. We usually defeat it, but it's just a symptom of how in our society, over a couple of hundred years, it's been organised and structured to facilitate the invasion of other countries, the devastation of Iraq, and now the genocide against the Palestinians and the Lebanese. So we're up against a formidable, sophisticated system of repression, and it doesn't allow it makes it very difficult for public opinion to make it to express itself.
Yes, and you mentioned that what's happening in Gaza today is more than a horror film or a horror movie. The Israeli occupation is now killing everybody in North Gaza, leaving no hospitals, no schools, nothing at all. And starvation, famine is spreading everywhere in North Gaza. How do you see the international solidarity response to the ongoing Israeli crimes, Mr. Napier? Are you satisfied with the performance of the solidarity movement these days?
Well, yes and no, because very many brave and wonderful people are trying their best, but they're up against a formidable system. But we do see in the United Nations when Netanyahu gets up to talk his disgusting words, a mass walkout. He speaks to a half-empty auditorium. And the International Confederation of Parliamentarians, meeting recently, it was a mass walkout when the Israeli gets up to speak. So we know the feeling around the world is extremely strong, but how can that feeling express itself? We see young people going to jail here in Scotland and Britain for trying to break up arms factories which supply Israel. But now we see journalists being raided by the police first thing in the morning. Now, it may seem very small because the Israelis have killed nearly 200 Palestinian and other journalists. And you're a journalist there, and I really honor you, because journalism, not journalists, but journalism has been killed in Britain in the mainstream media. But we now see attacks on any journalists who try to tell the truth, with arrests and police attacks and so on. So this is because, and it's not something new, although it's very intense now. But this is because for a very long time, public opinion in the West has been very strongly against Israel. And in fact, the authorities in Europe have promised Israel that the public opinion would never be allowed to influence policy. So we know this, the Zionists know this, and they're depending upon repression from willing governments like Biden and Starmer and the authorities in Brussels. We live in a democracy, yes, but it's a democracy where you can shout on a street corner, but there's massive repression to make sure those voices don't come together in free assembly.
Yes, we know that when we talk about the United States or the European countries in particular, like Britain, Germany, France, all these countries are based on the democratic system that they have built long ago. But today we see their disregard to the appeals and calls by the millions of their peoples who take to the streets, asking them to take the side, the right side, the side of justice, and to pressure Israel to stop its genocidal campaign against the Palestinians. But we do see that. And the German foreign minister last week said that Israel has the right to kill the civilians. So don't you think that this is a big blow to the democratic system on which these governments and the states are based?
Of course, Osama. France has a democratic system. People go and vote for parties like here every 5-6 years. But it didn't stop the French killing 1.5 million Algerians. It didn't stop the police in Paris murdering hundreds of Algerians and throwing them into the river when they demonstrated against French colonialism, and so on and so on. I can give you many examples of a democratic society, which is very limited democracy, by the way, but committing terrible atrocities. It wasn't a dictatorship that dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was democratic America. Although you have to be very careful, because the same army that did that had special army for black people and special army units for white people, and the army was segregated just as bad as in South Africa. So it's a very it's an imperial system which doesn't rely completely on repression. In a dictatorship, you have to be careful, because if you speak up, they pull out your fingernails, they take you and they kill you, like Israel and so on. Here, they use repression, but the thing starts in the schools with brainwashing, with telling people the British Empire was benign, that we behaved quite well in Palestine. The whole history of Britain in Palestine, of training Israeli savages to be more savage, all of that's hidden. The whole history of the genocides that Britain has committed. You know, Winston Churchill killed 3 million people in Bengal in order to get the food for the British Army. 3 million people died of starvation. So this horrible history of genocide committed by every European country is hidden from individuals. And when people leave school with this mindset, it's difficult to change them. We can change them, but it's difficult to change them. And that's where we are, Osama.
Yeah.
It's this terrible genocide in Gaza, and I hope you understand the spirit in which I say this. Yeah. There have been many before this, in Bengal, in South America, in Australia, in North America. America is born out of genocide, and so they naturally support Israel.
Yeah, and because you're talking about America, the elections are in the offing in the United States. And, you know, the American Secretary of State, Tony Blinken was in the region today, and he visited his friends in Israel. And he expressed his support for Israel and what he calls the right to self-defense. But he did not mention one word concerning the Palestinian children dying of hunger and thirst in North Gaza. So your personal perspective, do you think the result of the American election will make a difference when it comes to the Palestinian rights, whether Trump or Harris wins?
That's a big question. That's the big question to ask. I think yes and no. I know that sounds stupid, but it's not. I think that Trump is even worse than Biden, if that's possible. Trump is going to say to Israel, feel free to attack whoever you want. But on the other hand, the American system doesn't give the president a lot of freedom. He's controlled by the bureaucracy, by the whole machine and so on. And you know, it's important to point out that when Trump, who is a monstrous figure, but when Trump started running to be president the first time, he criticized Israel. You know, his big message is, we don't like foreigners, keep money in America, don't give money to anybody, get out of NATO. And he was also very critical of Israel. He said, why are we giving all this money to Israel? And his political supporters didn't have a problem with that. You know, the Christian evangelicals didn't desert Trump when he was criticizing Israel. What happened was, he didn't change his mind. He didn't change his mind. He didn't change his message because of popular opinion. He changed his message to get money from Jewish billionaires like Sheldon Adelson from Las Vegas and so on. And he changed the message to be more pro-Israel than even the Democrats. That's very difficult, but to be even more pro-Israel because he wanted access to those billions in order to run a political campaign. And in America, it is so democratic that it's if you have enough money, if you have $500 million, you can buy the presidency. So, but the key thing is, Trump is not fantastically committed to Israel. He just uses this, and I think he could dump Israel as quick as anybody else if they fail to defeat the resistance in Palestine and in Lebanon and across the wider Middle East. Can I just say one thing, Osama? Look, I just looked at the figures today. There are probably 6 million Zionist Jews in Israel. 1 million non-Zionist, religious Jews who are not Zionist at all.
Yes.
They're surrounded by 400, the last count, 473 million Arabs. Now, in that situation, when you have a regime which is dedicated to killing Arabs, Palestinians, and they're surrounded by hundreds of millions of people who quite rightly despise them and are very hostile to them, the only possibility is terrorism. If 7 people go into a room with 500 people and they want to dominate them, They have to terrorize, and that's why Israel is the highest level of horror and terrorism. They're trying to terrify everybody, not to resist them. But I think, quite honestly, I think this is the beginning of the end of the Zionist project, because internationally, worldwide, the hostility to Israel is like nothing we've ever seen before.
Yeah, and this leads me to the final question, Mr. Napier. Now, what Israel is doing in North Gaza in particular can't be imagined. It's more than war. It's genocide, it's ethnic cleansing, it's killing everybody, destroying everything. And we see the word silence, and I told you that Blinken was in Israel today and he said nothing about these pogroms and these massacres. Do you think that Israel is getting closer to its ultimate goal now of having no Palestinians in Gaza? And we heard of the settlers organizations preparing for building housing units for settlers there, and of having the West Bank as Netanyahu wants it to be. More settlements and Palestinians, if allowed to stay in the West Bank, living in pockets. Do you think Israel is getting to that goal now? What do you think?
Well, they're certainly getting closer to that goal. They've stated it very clearly. And the kind of Nazi ministers like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have such control over, such powerful influence over Netanyahu, that it's difficult to see him abandoning them now. So they're moving in that direction, but they still face problems. They still face problems because they will have to overthrow, they'll have to drive Palestinians into Jordan. And I'm not even sure the Americans will allow that. The fact is that Palestinians are paying with their blood,
yes,
in order to resist the Zionist project. But the Zionist project has ambitions beyond Palestine. It has ambitions in parts of Egypt and Lebanon and Jordan and so on. So how this will play out in the end, I confess I don't have a crystal ball, but I think we can see this. Unless the Zionist project is ended, there's no peace possible with a regime based on what the UN last week, the UN report, said. It didn't use the word genocide, it said extermination of Palestinians. No peace is possible, and until that dark shadow is lifted from the Middle East, the people across the whole Middle East, not just in Palestine, will always face the horror of this regime. And we have seen it is more bestial, more barbaric than anything that we could imagine. I think, Osama, if somebody had written a novel about this 2 years ago and sent this story to their editor, the editor would return the manuscript and say, this is too much. Nobody will believe this. It is unimaginable. So I think, yes, we are traumatized. We are beginning to lack the language to describe what Israel is doing. And I can't, we can't see short-term hope here. But I think Israel, like Napoleon invading Russia, like Hitler invading Russia, Israel will overreach itself ultimately. And I think already around the world, there can never be business as usual for Israel in most of the countries of the world, because people now know what savages they are.
Mick Napier of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, it has been a great honor having you on our program. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's my honor. Thank you.
You're welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. And from you, Osama Nazal, have a nice time.